Tēnā koutou katoa. We have now officially entered into spring, but I think someone forgot to advise the weatherman, as I'm sure it's cold enough for snow in Northland. But inside our webinar whānau this evening, the air is filled with anticipation as we welcome the lovely Jennifer Robb, who works as a dietitian at Auckland District Health Board. Jenny qualified as a dietitian in 1994 and worked at Waikato Hospital and Whanganui Hospital before jumping the ditch to the UK. Once in the UK, got to say it's a lovely place over there, eh? She worked in diabetes, renal and HIV nutrition in East London and Brighton. Jennifer then returned to New Zealand in 2000 and specialised in renal nutrition at Counties and more recently at Auckland District Health Board, working with patients with chronic kidney disease in outpatient clinics, haemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis units, with the recent addition of a renal support care clinic. Jenny enjoys working within a team of dietitians, nurse specialists and nephrologists to deliver nutritional care and improving quality of life for people living with chronic kidney disease. Linking beautifully with our presentation this evening based on nutrition for those with chronic kidney disease. And we shall now hand you over to Jenny. Thank you.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much for that warm welcome, and it's lovely to be speaking with you all this evening. If I was seeing you face to face, you'd get the added bonus of trying some nutrition supplements, but we can't do that on Zoom, but I hope you've got a nice drink in front of you instead. So this evening, for the next 50 minutes, I'd like to talk a little bit about CKD, the nutrition background, what some of the evidence is, and what does it mean for your patients, what the latest is on protein foods, what to say when people ask about the potassium and phosphate in foods, micronutrients, preventing malnutrition, a bit about popular diets, and then if we have time, haemodialysis, peritoneal dialysis, transplant and supportive care. I will try and keep to time and hopefully answer questions that you have as well. So the current guidelines are from the Kidney Disease Outcomes Quality Initiative, which is the National Kidney Foundation of the USA, and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, each right organisation, which have put out these clinical practice guideline update for nutrition and CKD in 2020. It was 20 years since the previous update and has taken the evidence from the last sort of 17 years, which is quite exciting. This time there were also dietitians involved in the research, and it covers all aspects of CKD 1 to 5 and those on dialysis. The clinical practice guidelines are a tool to facilitate decision making, and there is different strength behind each recommendation. A is very confident, down to D, not confident at all, or little confidence, and a 1 is a we recommend, and number 2 is we suggest, which you'll see as I go through the guidelines. Guidelines aren't gospel. They've got to be applied in the patient-centred, individualised manner and clinical judgment. There's 6 chapters and 75 recommendations. I'm only going through a few this evening. There's also been a recent meta-analysis of cohort studies looking at healthy dietary patterns and incidence of CKD. How does diet actually affect kidney outcomes? And a healthy dietary pattern, and this was in the Journal of the Society of Nephrology, and Yeamon Kelly and Christina Campbell are 2 Australian dietitians, and Sweetonia Palmer is a nephrologist here in New Zealand. The healthy dietary patterns that were shown to have the lower incidence of CKD association and the lower incidence of albuminuria was not too surprising: more fruit and vegetables, more legumes, nuts, whole grains, fish, and lower fat dairy products. There was encouraged to have lower intake of red meat, sodium, processed meats, and sugar-sweetened beverages. So if you don't listen to any more tonight and you take away that message, then that would be fantastic. Of course, how do we translate that into all our patients? Why is nutrition important for people with chronic kidney disease? And, why do I do what I do? And it's really yes, we've got these words here, to achieve and maintain a well-nourished state, keeping the biochemistry within acceptable limits. But it's also trying to, for some people, help them gain weight. Others keep the biochemistry within the right markers, optimize other comorbidities like working with diabetes, HbA1c, keeping skeletal muscle stores and strength up, and this is important as they're heading towards dialysis. And I think the last two are the most important, and this is what we work hard on, is maximising quality of life and well-being, and assist patients to achieve their individual goals. In other words, enjoy their food, eat what they're eating, but keep well. This is where you're all coming into it as well, because the risk factors for CKD progression are all the things that you're working with every day: diabetes, blood pressure, heart, obesity, tobacco. The other two we can't change so much. The aim is to slow the rate of progression. So in terms of diet advice, focus is healthy eating, healthy weight, exercise, and reducing sodium. And the stages of chronic kidney disease 1 to 5, based on the GFR, where you're involved in the CKD 1 to 3A or 3B, is diagnosing and treating the comorbidities, particularly at 2 and 3. Usually at 1, people don't know so much whether they have a change in kidney function or it's aging. But the role that you have in whether it's a GP practice, diabetes, cardiac clinics, outpatient clinics, extremely important, because it can help delay the review or moving towards chronic kidney disease and end-stage renal failure. At CKD 4-5, what we're trying to do then is optimise the intake to reduce symptoms of uremia and prevent malnutrition. And at this point, depending on DHBs and how it works, would be referred to a nephrologist, renal dietitian, and the multidisciplinary team, so that we can prepare people for dialysis and then monitor when they're on dialysis as well. I put this slide up because, and it's quite an old study, but we can talk all about food as much as we like, but it's really the patient experience and perspective of living with kidney disease that's important. And this was a study back in 2001 by Alison Tong, a nephrologist in Australia, who looked at what people were experiencing with kidney disease. And the words in the red for all the different bubbles were repeated again and again. And for us, whether we're a dietitian or nurse or GP, understanding the other bubbles are as important as to be able to then work with the diet and nutrition. The key points for the diet restrictions that came out in this study was that people struggled to understand. So health literacy, using the right words, terminology, simplifying the words is really important. And for example, now we use the word kidney in our clinics and wording in letters rather than renal. So it's simplifying it. The mixed messages, and this is a real problem where one person says, oh, you've got kidney disease, you can't eat this, and someone else says that you can, and it's no problem. The paradoxical nutrition advice is more about, first of all, and it is quite right, that we might be recommending that someone limits their protein intake, and then when they start dialysis, we're asking them to increase their protein intake. and that can be very confusing. Over time, and since the study in 2001, people have been asking for more guidance in food preparation. And so it's trying to look at, we link in with food displays or cooking displays, and keeping things practical. Hence, in the clinic, I'll always have real foods packets and to be able to put it in a real context. If I get lucky enough to do home visits, I try and look in people's kitchens when invited, and we can work really well. Then there's the big thing is the conflict, knowing all the nutrition messages, but trying to live in the real world. Like, for example, Auckland going to level 3 and being able to drive through McDonald's drive-through, knowing that that's going to be high in salt and fat, but still wanting to do it because that's what the rest of the whānau's doing. So why not? So this is really important for putting everything else, I think, into context. So to use a patient trend who's loosely based on someone that I have seen for the rest of the guidelines, I thought it would be more practical and a little bit more interesting. So he's CKD3, secondary to hypertension, and he's on hypertension on medications, overweight, he's got gout, family history of diabetes with impaired glucose tolerance, and the relevant biochemistry below. So what does this guideline, the KDOQI guideline, say for sodium in 2020? Probably not too much different to the 20 years ago when the guidelines first came out, but perhaps slightly stronger evidence, 1B, 1C, to say that we'd recommend limiting sodium intake to less than 100 millimoles or 2.3 grams per day to reduce blood pressure and improve volume control. Same with proteinuria. There's slightly stronger evidence to say less than 100 millimoles and use pharmacological interventions or medicines as well. What does 100 millimoles look like? Well, it's, to give you an example, 1 tablespoon of soy sauce has 1,500 milligrams, or if that was 2,300 milligrams, it's getting up there towards what we're recommending. And this, the DASH diet, which was a study back in 2001 that is probably you've heard of, looking at reducing dietary sodium intake on systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure using 3 different diets of the amounts of sodium in the diet. It was based on the American diet at the time that was very high in sodium and still is. But the DASH diet was strongly associated with significantly lower systolic blood pressure at each sodium level, and each sodium level was, whether you're on the DASH diet or control diet, high was 150 millimoles, medium 100, and then low was 50. And again, significant decrease in both groups. And this DASH diet is quoted in the study because it is hard to come across significant randomized controlled trials for nutrition. So going from a study back to Trent, who gave me a 24-hour food recall, looking at his sodium, the foods that stand out that are higher in sodium, his toast. He has toast for breakfast and eggs and tea and sugar. He has banana and latte for morning tea, a footlock Subway sandwich for lunch when he's out on the road, and afternoon tea, a banana and a cookie time biscuit, can of Red Bull, and before dinner, the salted peanuts, beer, and for dinner, sort of chopped veggies and some gravy. The sodium foods that stand out: peanuts, the biscuit, gherkin, the mayo a little bit, and the Subway sandwich and the toast. So looking at Trent's analysis of his sodium, which I've put in bold here, is his sodium intake for 24 hours, and it just randomly worked out that it was 4,000 milligrams. The recommendation, as we've seen in the guideline, is less than 2,300 milligrams a day, and this is mostly from processed foods. So in one day, he's having quite a significant amount of sodium. The others on the table I'll come back to when we're looking at them later on. So what does Trent do? Well, he goes to Bunnings and has a sausage sizzle, and then realises that his 2 sausages, 2 slices of bread, his tomato sauce and his coleslaw adds up to close to 2,210 milligrams, which is close to his daily recommendation of 2,300. So that night he goes home and on his grilled plate instead has a lamb chop, a low salt potato salad, a green salad and light dressing, and that comes to 230 milligrams. So Trent is sort of thinking about what sodium changes that he can make and keeping it realistic that, yes, he will have the sausage sizzle, but are there other options that he can have? And we would be looking at tools that he can use, for example, the Food Switch app, where the phone turns into a barcode scanner and you can look at the barcode and what is on a food in terms of, yes, sodium and other nutrients. But in this case, the sodium on this food is like a traffic light. Red's too high, trying to find foods that are lower in sodium as an alternative. Or he could use the Ministry of Health and diabetes guidelines for basic label reading, paper-based as well. Often people want pictorial ways to make changes, and again, we're always looking at swapping foods to eat less sodium or whatever the nutrient is, so that we're not cutting out foods. For example, going from salt and soy sauce and a lot of fish sauce to can you flavour your own foods with herbs and spices and ginger and garlic and so on. What we also do now is get the like a 2-minute noodle pack, take out the flavouring sachet, and we've made our own, and we give it to patients who are interested. We also do cooking demonstrations from time to time to show how this can happen. So it's not just words on a paper. People get to have experience for themselves and then can alter it and say, yes, well, I've added more pepper or more ginger or garlic or whatever they like. So it is looking at simple swaps, but working it into the person's diet history and what's going to work for them. And is this Trent's new low sodium takeaway? Delightful fries on the left and burger on the right. But if you look closely, yes, it's all made of fruit. And I think if I could, it would have said, nice try, dietitian. But we certainly could make other takeaways a lot healthier. But I really like this picture here. The KDOKI guidelines for diabetes, the 2020 update. Patients with diabetes and CKD should consume a diet high in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, fibre, legumes, plant-based proteins, unsaturated fats and nuts, and lower in processed meats, refined carbohydrates, and sweetened beverages. Again, if you leave the Zoom right now and take away this message, similar to the one before, this is fantastic. It's also backed up by the Kidney Disease Improving Global Outcomes, the KDIGO guidelines, which came out for CKD and diabetes management in 2020, and of course our own New Zealand Society for the Study of Diabetes as well. This could be a whole topic on its own, so I won't go into any more detail here. When it comes to weight, we still look at the use of BMI, so 18, less than 18 is underweight, greater than 30 is obesity. But of course, there's the ongoing issue that we can't identify sort of muscle versus visceral fat, but it does give us an idea. We can also, when look at whether someone's an apple shape with the higher risk of visceral fat and related issues versus the pear shape as well. And the recommendation is to measure BMI in people every 6 months for CKD 1 to 3. Interestingly, though, there is an obesity paradox where being overweight or obese in some haemodialysis patients can improve all-cause mortality. So obesity can be related with improved outcomes in select patient populations. And this was a study back in not too long ago in 2018, which has started to look at this and why we're trying to prevent people being underweight before they start dialysis. It is with some relief that people find that as we're getting closer to CKD 5, we're not talking about weight at all, certainly not talking about weight loss. We want to prevent becoming malnourished or underweight, which is quite a relief when they've had a weight message all their lives. So when it comes to protein, what type and amount for people with CKD? Now, this guideline is interesting in that for adults without diabetes and who have CKD 3 to 5, who are metabolically stable, recommending a low protein diet, 0.55 to 0.6 grams of protein per kilo per day. This is a low protein diet, and in reality, it is not what we follow. A low protein diet would be extremely hard to follow, not pleasant, and also then at risk of not getting adequate protein. We need to add keto analogues to this. For the patients who are not on dialysis but with diabetes, it's higher, it's 0.6 to 0.8 grams to maintain a stable nutritional status and optimize glycemic control. And this is because they might be modifying carbohydrate intake. This is a more realistic range. And so in reality, the more streamlined recommendation is 0.8 grams per kilo per day if someone's metabolically stable. We know that the protein reduction benefits are that you're not getting so much of the nitrogen waste products, reduced hyperfiltration, improving acidosis, and ultimately reducing potassium and phosphorus intake, and may reduce clinical symptoms and postpone the need to start dialysis. So yes, there's a need to reduce protein, but not to that 0.5, 0.6. So again, what does this mean? Going back to Trent, his protein intake protein foods are mainly coming from eggs, from the milk, the latte, the cheese, the ham, the peanuts, the pork chop. So in one day, if we're looking at Trent's protein intake, over here on the left, 131 grams, which is 1.2 grams per kilo per day above the certainly above the 0.8 grams per kilo body weight per day recommendation from the guidelines. So again, we're not going to quibble about the 0.5 to 0.6 because he's at 1.24. The last nutrition survey we had in New Zealand, which is a while ago now, 2009, the average protein intake per day for New Zealanders was 1.35 grams per kilo per day. So in other words, we're all overeating the amount of protein. So whether we're not, again, we wouldn't be talking with grams per kilo for most people using this plate model that you've probably seen, but here it's looking at a few different cultural groups. The same concept, it's quarter of the plate to be plant or animal proteins, quarter of the plate, the whole grain, starchy veggies, and half the plate fruit and vegetables, whether it's on a banana leaf or in a bowl or in a tortilla. And this comes from the KDIGO guidelines, and I think it's quite a nice graphic, really. So what type of protein? Because there is a lot more research about plant versus animal. Remembering that the evidence came from about 2000 to 2017, by that stage there wasn't enough evidence to recommend a particular type of protein, plant versus animal, in terms of nutritional status, calcium or phosphorus levels, or blood lipid profile. There's a lot more research and evidence coming out now since then, so it is likely to change again in the future. And why is that? We're learning more of that plants are generally alkaline forming, which is beneficial when people have to start taking the sodium or the sodium bicarbonate for metabolic acidosis, and vegetables and fruit can have an equally beneficial effect, and that's what the research is looking at. Plant-based diets have low phosphorus bioavailability. In other words, there is phosphorus in there, but it's not so bioavailable. Same for potassium, and a higher fibre intake, which has the benefits for improving constipation and bowel health, which is really important as well. And naturally reduces sodium intake, so less processed foods. So the guidelines also, with reasonable evidence, suggest that prescribing increased fruit and vegetable intake may decrease body weight, blood pressure, and the net acid production, as in the slide previously. And I have to put this up there. I should have warned you. Oops, I just should have warned you. Slide coming that has disturbing content, but it is something we do need to talk about. And I have my laminated Bristol stool chart that goes everywhere with me, and patients pretty much know what they're aiming for, the type 3 to type 4. And again, important to have adequate fruit, veggies, fibre to prevent constipation. And also we have to ask about straining as well. Sorry that I didn't give enough warning about that. And yes, we talk about, again, with the nephrologist, that the medications needed when particularly on a fluid restriction. So how's Trent doing for his fibre? Well, his one day, and it is only one day, his fibre intake was 23 grams. The recommendation for men is 30 grams a day, women 25 grams. So he's not quite there. He had one serve of fruit, aiming for at least two. He had 2 serves of veggies and aiming for greater than 5 in the day, so less than the recommendation. So giving the advice on protein, which had been led on to fruits and veg and plant-based, both, it is about the variety and diet quality. Both can be adequate in essential amino acids. So it really comes down to the individual patient needs and requirements and what the person wants to eat. But whatever we're talking about, in this case protein, or whether it's sodium or potassium, we need to talk about food and not nutrients, and use a stepwise approach to help people achieve their goal. When we're trying to help increase more plant-based protein and decrease overall protein intake, it might be trying to reduce it by 0.2 grams of protein per kilo over several encounters, so they get used to the concept. Gradually introducing plant proteins, for example, like the Meatless Monday. And I do know, Kathy, that Whanganui Hospital, the favourite menu item, this is the renal dietitians telling me, for the patients is chili con carne. So they are getting the red kidney beans, increasing plant protein, sometimes without realising it. And we do encourage people, if they don't like the red kidney beans, to try and mash it or use it in another way. So it's very individual, and there's cultural preferences. Some people say to me, I'm never introducing plant proteins, and so they might not for a while, but we'll keep working on it. And often it's important to monitor adherence regularly. By that, sometimes they might hear something else about protein or change things, or talk to someone who's on dialysis and realise that we've got to keep the individual person's advice as well. So moving on now to what to say when people ask about potassium and phosphate. What do the guidelines say for hyperkalemia, so high potassium, or hypokalemia, the low potassium, in CKD 3 to 5 and who are on dialysis or post-transplant? This evidence is opinion with either hyperkalemia or hypokalemia. We suggest that dietary or supplemental potassium be based on a patient's individual needs and clinician judgment. So in other words, we need to look at everyone individually, and if recommending low potassium fruit, vegetables and other foods, we need to recommend that foods still contain a high level of fibre and micronutrients, so replacing it with a lower potassium alternative. So we're going to stop now and do a little quiz. Don't know whether you can send any answers to Kathy or just do it yourselves, but out of the foods that I'm putting up here, and I'll just put everyone up. Should have, yep, that's it. Which has the most potassium per serve? And I'm going to give you 30 seconds or so to do this. I'm going to have a sip of water while you do. Think about it. Unfortunately, there's no prizes. If I was in front of you, one of you might get a bottle of Nepro or Renal on as a prize. But is it the tomato? That's a medium size. Is it the banana? That's just slightly bigger than this one. This is 120 grams. I weighed it before. Is it a bar of chocolate? Is it a glass of orange juice? A baked potato. Now, this potato is 90 grams. I did weigh it. I thought it was going to be a lot less than that. Is it 150 grams of beef or half a cup of taro leaves? And then if you've got time, rank them from the highest to the lowest. And then on the next slide, I'm going to give you the answer.
So far coming through on the answers, there's quite a stream of people thinking the banana, and there's some who are saying the orange juice. That seems to be...
Right, so we've got the banana and the orange juice. Okay. So just so that you continue listening, I'm going to tell you the answer is something completely different. It's the beef. So from here on in, if you go away with one message, the poor banana isn't the highest. It's not even the second. The second is the baked potato with 12.5 millimoles per serve. Third is the taro leaves. Fourth is the orange juice. The banana comes in close behind at 11 millimoles. And the tomato 8.6. So often when someone is hearing, yes, my potassium's going up, perhaps a well-meaning friend or someone says, right, immediately you need to cut out the banana. That's not necessarily true. Often we do find it could be the meat portion, the potato that might be baked and not, boiled and mashed. That's contributing a lot of the potassium. And the poor banana gets such a hard time. Oh, and the chocolate, I missed that, comes in last. So chocolate's okay. So I put this up, go the banana, because, bananas are smart, hard workers, give us a lot of energy. Yes, full of potassium, but it's about the amount and the size, and might not be the banana that's increasing the potassium, it might be the meat. So hopefully you've learned one thing tonight. But yes, in all seriousness, a hyperkalemia greater than 6 millimoles per mole and trending upwards can be life-threatening, and potassium from food might be a cause. And unfortunately, this week, we had a youngish Tongan man who ended up in hospital and ED with potassium of over 7. And he now wants to listen to advice on how to manage his hyperkalemia. Twice the doctor said he is lucky to be alive, and we want to prevent this. But we need to look at whether it's diet and other factors. We don't want to impose unnecessary restrictions unless there's a real need to. If it can't be reversed, we want to look at the most important dietary sources. So if someone says, well, I don't want to eat so many tomatoes or not so worried about potatoes, we wouldn't take away the foods that they're really important. It would then be looking at the portion size. And ask the patient if they don't eat tomatoes or bananas, then we don't need to sort of talk about it. And always including the lower potassium foods that still are high in fibre and micronutrients and low potassium bioavailability. And recommend low potassium alternative foods. Another key message here: if your potassium level is normal, you don't have a potassium problem. And we say this a lot. The nurses say it a lot because someone hears their potassium's 5.4 and cut out bananas, chocolate, potatoes, and don't need to. We don't want to restrict foods unless there's a need. And if you don't have if your level's normal, you don't have a problem. What about phosphorus? Yes, in adults with CKD 3 to 5D, we recommend adjusting dietary phosphorus to maintain serum phosphate levels with the 1B range. What we're also looking at more now is phosphorus restriction to consider the bioavailability of the phosphorus sources, whether it's animal, vegetable, or additives. And by this, on the next slide, and I'll just put it all up, it is actually the E numbers that contain phosphorus that are the bigger problem than the phosphorus that might be in milk or meat or yogurt or chocolate, for example. That's not so bioavailable. And so the manufacturers don't have to, they put on the E numbers on on the label, but don't have to say how much is in there. And they are in there for various functions, whether it's anti-caking or stabilising. And it is different from brand to brand. There is the 2 powdered drinks out there where one brand has these E numbers in there and another brand doesn't. So it is good to be able to look to see the difference between the brands. So the ones in bold are the ones that are most commonly used. And so we've put them on a little card for patients to take round with them when they're supermarket shopping. Because, again, it doesn't have to be labelled on a food as the same way that sodium has to be. So the most bioavailable phosphorus food sources are these additives. So that's what we want to target first. We're going to absorb more of that than we are the phosphorus from the milk or yogurt, like I said before. What about the micronutrients? We're looking at supplementing if someone's deficient or insufficient, and would be sort of looking at trends and appetite and malnutrition and so on to determine that. The vitamin deficiency most common in CKD is folic acid and vitamin B6, vitamin C, other water-soluble vitamins, and 25-hydroxy vitamin D. The zinc and selenium may be a problem, but equally toxicity of micronutrients, particularly the fat-soluble ones, A and E, can be a concern as well. And in adults with CKD 3 to 4 who aren't taking active vitamin D analogues, total elemental calcium from any source should equal 800 to 1,000 milligrams a day. So from knowing all this and knowing that, and this is a real person that came into clinic who was taking all of these to help with my kidneys, and it was performance energy and yeast and nattokinase. In this little table here, the vitamin A intake was 5 times the RDI, the vitamin C was 24 times, the vitamin D was 42 times the RDI, and the vitamin D 6 times over. And the B vitamins were ranging from 50 to 80 times the RDI. So people at these, when the CKD 3 or 4 want to take things to try and improve kidney function, can actually be doing more damage. And we want to address this in an appropriate way and sort of explain why we're recommending not to take these. We now have an alternative, which is the clinician's renal vit developed by dietitians and nephrologists and Douglas Pharmaceuticals, which is funded when GFR is less than 15, although people can purchase it above that, and is a lot closer to the RDIs for the B group, C, D, and the micronutrients as well. And it's just 1 tablet once a day instead of a whole raft of other bottles. When it comes to energy, I just put this one up there. We're really trying to, we talked before about the obesity paradox, but we're really trying to prevent protein energy malnutrition, protein energy wasting in those who are close to dialysis or have started dialysis. And the calories, 25 to 30 calories per day, ideal body weight per kilo per day is what we're recommending. When I looked at Trent's one-day intake, he was within this range. As I alluded to before, malnutrition and CKD is what we're really focusing on, particularly 4, 5 and on dialysis. There is uremia, which and CKD, which is the loss of lean body mass that can occur, the taste changes, people go off food and don't understand why, poor appetite, feeling generally unwell, nausea, which can be difficult to reverse. And if we have the poor nutrition status at the start of dialysis, poor outcomes, increased mortality and morbidity. One study by Maria Chan, a dietitian in Sydney, of the units she was looking at, found that 52% of patients were malnourished commencing dialysis back in 2012. So this is a real concern for us. And Jose Carrero, a nephrologist, looked at the appetite loss in CKD, again, quite a while ago, but still a relevant study looking at when you sort of stop having the appetite suppressants, and as you go down the GFR, so does the appetite. Start dialysis can feel better, and then that can decline over time until if having a transplant can keep the appetite, kick the appetite back again. And this is what we're trying to prevent, the appetite just really plummeting to nothing, to prevent malnutrition. So questions that you can ask people with CKD 3 to 5 to assess nutrition status changing. Have you been losing weight unintentionally? Concern at greater than 2% unintentional weight loss over the past month. Get someone to describe their appetite. Is it very good, fair, or poor? And what are the changes over the past month or past 3 months? And compared to normal intake, how would you rate your food intake during the past month? Unchanged, more than usual, less than usual. And this is adapted from a patient-generated global assessment that we do with all patients every 6 months on dialysis, and trying to introduce it more at the pre-dialysis stage to determine if someone is at risk of becoming malnourished, and also if so, are they improving or getting worse? What we can do is try and have food first to boost intake, and before we'd start the oral nutrition supplements such as Renal or Nepro. But these are funded, renal specific, low electrolyte, low fluid, and again have the right balance of vitamins and minerals that hopefully taste nice as well. Sorry, you don't get to try it tonight. Or there is the general Fortisip Ensure as alternatives. And there is also, when someone needs increased protein but have adequate calories, then we'd recommend adding Benny protein powder to tea or mashed potatoes, or Protofar, which is an alternative which we didn't have there. So what did the clinical practice guidelines say about the dietary patterns? The only one with the evidence that they looked at was the Mediterranean diet guidelines. And we suggest that prescribing the Mediterranean diet may improve lipid profiles. But what about all the other ones out there? And the popular diets in CKD, keto diet, high fat, moderate protein, maybe, again, if someone's following this, we'll work with it, but trying to prevent sort of the fatigue, the dizziness that may go with it, but particularly nutrient deficiencies that may occur. Definitely we want to prevent kidney stones and liver disease. Just sort of work with, is it the best for them long term? The high protein diets we wouldn't recommend, as you could see, particularly at the CKD 3 to 5, to try and not overload the kidney, limit the protein intake so it doesn't have to work harder. Intermittent fasting may work, may be an issue for people with diabetes. The detox diet, we talk to people about how their own livers and kidneys can do that quite well, and gut, and perhaps we need to look at increasing fruit and vegetable and protein, plant-based proteins. The Mediterranean diet is recommended, the DASH diet, and regardless of diet, portion control and increasing physical activity can lead to success as well. So what's Trent's new 24-hour recall for managing his CKD? Well, he's done so well. He's listened to everything and changed his toast to whole grain toast, mushrooms, spinach, so more veggies at breakfast. He's got his trim latte, his whole grain sandwich, got the berry yogurt. He started making his own hummus. Of course, he can still have his beer. He's cut down the meat and increased the veggies. And what's happened? Well, his fibre intake's gone to 31 grams. His fruit serves up to 3. His veggie serves up to 6. And he's feeling a whole lot better. And yes, his protein came down to 85 grams. So your take-home points, if you hadn't left when you first heard them, higher intake of fruit and veggies, legumes, nuts, fish, whole grains, and lower fat dairy are recommended for people with chronic kidney disease. Lower intake of red meat, sodium, processed foods, and sugar-sweetened beverages. Use a renal multivitamin when GFR is less than 15. Look at the serum potassium trend before giving potassium food advice, and think about the banana. And in everything, the patient-centred approach for making food recommendations and culturally appropriate advice, and no unnecessary restrictions. And finally, let's not turn renal nutrition into rocket science. And that's all our jobs to do that, whether we're nurses, dietitians, GPs as well. These are some of the resources that are available that you're likely to be aware of: Kidney Health New Zealand, Australia, and websites, Health Navigator, Health Point if you want to find your local renal dietitian, Easy Diet Diaries is one of the apps that we use as well. All sorts of recipes and different ideas, how to get those plant-based proteins up, and a few key websites. So I'll stop there because I know you can see that we've run out of time and we want time for some questions. But the last 3 slides, if you do look at them, is information for hemo-PD and transplant supportive care, which again your local dietitians would be able to talk through because they'll be working with those types of patients. So thank you, and I'll hand back to Kathy.
Oh no, now we get to share. That was fantastic, Jenny. You've got a wealth of knowledge in there. Eh? It's a huge subject. You can understand why patients get lost sometimes, eh? But I think what you say is one of the key things is talking about actual foods, not groups of foods. So as it means something, so they can actually use it. And with regards to when someone's asked about things like your lentils, your peas, and your vegetables, does it matter if they're in a can or if they're frozen?
No. If anything's in a can, we try and have it in, drain any of the brine away. But if it's like fish in a can, you'd have it in spring water. But whether it's veggies, canned, frozen, fresh, no, we're trying to increase whatever is going to work for someone's budget and availability.
Thank you. And so I've got, is there a relationship between kidney function and muscle weakness? How does protein powder and creatinine monohydrate affect kidney function? 2 questions in one there, isn't it? So the relation is there a relationship between kidney function and muscle weakness, I suppose, is part A?
Yes. So, we do get muscle weakness as the kidney function declines, as in muscle loss. I think that's what the question, hopefully I'm answering it correctly. So we are trying to prevent that. So, yes. And what was the second part?
The second part is, does protein powder and creatinine monohydrate affect kidney function? Or creatine monohydrate, sorry, if I read myself right.
Yeah.
And kidney function.
So with protein powder, we would be looking at what someone is taking in the amount so that it's still working within their protein requirements for their stage of kidney function, but not particularly recommending. You'd still want to get all your balance of amino acids, whether it's from food or it could be from powders, but we'd sort of have to look at it on an individual basis, again, wanting to make sure that we're going to get excess.
Thank you. And this one, so what is the definition of malnutrition? Okay, it's symptoms driven, but how to objectively measure?
Right. That's interesting. We've got Malnutrition Awareness Week coming up in early October. I have a nice little card of how you define malnutrition, but it's a BMI of less than 18 and you've lost certain amount of muscle mass, and the exact definition of malnutrition, I should know off the I do this all the time with the patient, so it's our patient-generated subjective global assessment. So we're looking at muscle weight loss greater than 2% in 1 month or 5.6% in 6 months. Is the metabolic demand gone up? We do physical exam looking at changes in temples, fat stores, and muscle mass. And so is there loss of decrease in intake, presence of the nutrition impact systems, mild to moderate muscle loss and tone, and functional deterioration as well. So it's a combination of all those factors.
Thank you, Nessa. And that is an interesting one. What are your thoughts on clients eating while on haemodialysis?
So there's been some studies on that. Generally, we found that it's okay if, again, it's not a huge meal, it's like a snack and they want to and they're going to eat. Because I know there's studies that saying that they shouldn't. But from our experience, it's been fine for someone to eat on dialysis. I'd have to go away and find the evidence if you wanted more studies, but they're there.
Thank you. And patients with CKD often have a high urea. It can be hard to tell in the elderly how much to push oral fluids or whether it's due to their CKD. Any tips on how to manage this?
Because they've got a decline in kidney function anyway. Not really. Again, you're wanting to make sure they've got adequate nutrition, not excessive, but malnutrition would be the big focus, that they didn't, made sure they had enough protein, enough nutrients. So doesn't totally answer it. It's hard.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, look, there you go. You survived the Q&A session this evening, Jenny. But like, there's already, as soon as you were finished, there were messages started flooding in from people, particularly saying about how informative your presentation. That's a very strong thing coming through, and how easy as a presenter you were to understand, and how the information could then be taken realistically back to whānau that people are dealing with. So your time this evening and your presentation has been beautifully put together and well received from the people who have tuned in. So thank you very much for your time this evening.